Have you ever noticed how sometimes a big, groundbreaking discovery ends up feeling more like a really comforting story? Today, we're going to dig into that. We'll look at how a major work of scholarship can reveal this deep tension in how we create and consume knowledge, and how sometimes the need for a good narrative can actually overtake the search for hard science. Okay, so let's get right into it. The whole thing really boils down to this one book trying to pull off two very different missions at the exact same time. On one side, you have this mission of scientific recovery, digging through old archives to find a whole new perspective. But on the other side, it's doing something else, moral repair. It's trying to clean up the image of a pretty controversial tradition. And it's right there, in the friction between these two jobs, that things get really, really interesting. So the book we're talking about is Kevin Anderson's The Late Marx and the Russian Road. And let's be super clear here. This is a landmark piece of historical research. I mean, it literally unearths a side of Karl Marx that almost no one had ever seen, one that was kind of hidden away in his late life notebooks. So what did Anderson actually find in those notebooks? Well, he discovered that in his final years, Marx was just obsessively studying non-European societies, everything from Russian peasant communes to indigenous groups in North America. And all this research suggested that Marx was starting to abandon his old idea, the one where all societies had to follow this single European path of development. His thinking was becoming more open, more comparative, honestly, way less Eurocentric, a genuinely huge discovery. But here's the twist. This incredible discovery doesn't just sit there as a neat historical fact. Oh no, it gets put to work. It starts serving this other purpose, to reassure us, the modern readers, that a theory often slammed for being too focused on Europe can in fact embrace the whole non-European world. It morally repairs the entire tradition, giving us this nice, clean image of a theory that's been purified of its old arrogance. And this leads us right to the crucial shift, that exact moment when a scientific inquiry turns into a moral answer. How does a bunch of unfinished notes about a really complex question get transformed into a simple, satisfying story? You see, at its heart, Marx's late research was him grappling with a really tough scientific problem. He was trying to figure out the specific material conditions. We're talking things like land ownership, state taxes, market forces that would let these communal societies resist or maybe even transform capitalism. It was a totally open question he was investigating. But that's not how the book tells the story. Instead of treating Marx's notes as the start of a brand new research project, it presents his scientific hesitation, his uncertainty, as this big moment of ethical conversion. His academic puzzle gets retold as a scene of conscience, as if he suddenly had this moral awakening about how valuable these other societies were. So what should have been an investigation into a change of variables becomes a story about a change of heart. And that right there just perfectly captures the entire transformation. A complex scientific problem about how societies actually function. It's simplified into a personal moral evolution. It's summed up perfectly by this idea. A scientific unknown is replaced by a moral known. Suddenly, we don't have to wrestle with a difficult problem anymore. Instead, we just get to feel good about Marx's newfound empathy. Now, look, this isn't just about one author or one book. This shift from science to story happens for a reason, and it's deeply rooted in the systemic pressures that affect intellectual work today. It really comes down to three key pressures. First, there's visibility. Academics have to appeal to both their peers and to political audiences, and in that world, showing you care can be just as important as proving a claim. Second, legitimacy. A tradition like Marxism, which is under constant critique, desperately needs a story of renewal to stay relevant. And third, circulation. Let's face it, simple, catchy ideas just travel faster and farther than complex, data-heavy theories. So what's the end result of all this? Well, when these pressures take over, a theory's big claims don't really need to be verified with evidence anymore. They just need to be affirmed. Your agreement isn't based on data, it's based on whether you sympathize with the moral of the story. This whole thing raises a really fascinating question, though. What if that other path had been taken? What would the purely scientific approach, totally free from the need for a moral narrative, what would that have actually looked like? Yeah, let's really dig into that for a second. If we decided to treat Marx's notes not as a redemption story, but as the blueprint for a real research project, what kinds of questions would we actually be asking? This alternative path is incredibly concrete. It leads to real, empirical questions that we could actually go out and test. For instance, does collective land ownership actually slow down capitalist development? Do societies with strong traditions of mutual support show more resistance to class division? These are testable questions with real-world answers.
And this brings us to two totally different destinations. The path of inquiry, the scientific one, leads to a research program, a living, breathing set of testable ideas about how societies work. The path of morality, on the other hand, leads to a lesson in character. It just ends with a simple conclusion that because Marx cared, his intellectual tradition gets to live on. One path generates new knowledge, the other just generates reassurance.
So, the big question is, how do we get beyond these feel-good redemption stories? How do we switch from a mode of what is basically intellectual confession back to a mode of active, rigorous investigation? Well, the proposed path back to science is this rigorous 6-step plan. It starts with the absolute basics. Go back and verify the original manuscripts. From there, you formalize the ideas into measurable variables you can actually test with historical data. And crucially, it also means collaborating with the actual communities being studied, not just theorizing about them from an office. The final steps are all about modeling how these factors interact, and, this is the most important part, evaluating the results based on hard evidence, not on how good the story makes us feel. Honestly, adopting an approach like this would be a total game changer. The entire goal of scholarship would shift, away from just celebrating one person's brilliant interpretation and toward a collective group effort to verify, test, and actually build knowledge together. To put it in sociological terms, this is all about what a field values. It's a move away from rewarding what's called cultural capital, which is just being fluent in the right moral language, and a move toward rewarding scientific capital, where your prestige comes from creating knowledge that can be proven right, or, just as importantly, proven wrong. And when that happens, the whole purpose of critical thinking is reclaimed. The work of critique is no longer just about pointing out flaws or telling a better story. It becomes, once again, the difficult but absolutely essential work of discovery. So we'll leave you with this question. This analysis focused on one academic field, but you can see this pattern playing out everywhere. Just think about the information you consume every single day, in the news, in documentaries, even in explainers like this one. When does a comforting story, no matter how well-intentioned it is, actually get in the way of a difficult but necessary discovery?